One of the tools, we had a short PD on this with our district TOSA, and she was talking about using close reading, and she showed us a couple of strategies. I took some of those strategies and kind of made them into my own. So we're going to work on a technique that I use in my classroom that I call the Foursquare. You started out with your kids having to work with the whole class. As they learn to use it, then now I have kids that use it in small groups, I have kids that use it in pairs, and I have a few that are actually starting to use it independently. So it's a tool for them to access and be more successful. One of the reasons that we're covering this is because our benchmark scores in math were extremely low. They were way lower than we're used to. When we did our data analysis, one of the things we noticed is our kids can do computation, but they have problems applying. So when they get to a word problem, they have trouble accessing it, they don't know what to do, they just take some numbers and do something with them. So this is a way to help them know what to do with those numbers that they get, especially students that are poor readers. This helps them get past the fact that sometimes they have difficulty reading the problem, taking it apart, and getting them to be able to access it. So, please keep in mind, modify this to what you need. This is the way I use it. This is the way it works for me. I've changed things up as we've gone along. Sometimes I still change things up on it. So it's just a strategy, just to give you an idea of what to do. So the first thing that I do with my students, they get a blank piece of paper, and this is to start out again to train them. And I have them fold it so they make 4 squares. A lot of them like to draw with their pencils, so they actually have 4 squares. And I'm going to put my 4 square up here on my Elmo, so it looks a little more GQ. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to actually just kind of walk you through how we do it, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give you another word problem, and I'm going to let you kind of pair up and work it with each other. So the word problem that we're doing, if you look on your handout, is we're going to do word problem 1 on your handout. So Tim and Bob went to the comic book store on Saturday. Tim bought 6 comic books and Bob bought 12 comic books. How many total comic books did the boys buy? So I started out, and most of these that I have on here are very simple, but this technique also works really well if you have more complex word problems. They can access those. Alrighty, and now I have lost my Elmo pad. Gary, what did I do with my Elmo pad? Something really clever, I know. This is called...
It's under that white piece of paper, isn't it? No?
No. What did I do with my pad?
There it is.
There it is. All right, I knew it couldn't have gone far. All right, so the first thing we do after they fold their paper is we put these symbols in. So, there we go. All right. So we put these symbols in. And excuse me just a moment because my pad does not want to show. All right, thank you, Rebecca. Technology, always a thrill when it works correctly. All right, so what we're going to do in these corners for this very first, the upper left quadrant, you're going to put a question mark in the corner because that's where we're going to deal with our actual question. And in the right upper quadrant, we're going to put Q, U. That's where we're going to deal with our quantity and our unit, so what quantities and units. And again, as you do this with your students, obviously you have to go through step by step, and you have to go through what quantity is and what unit is and all of that good stuff, but I figure you're adults. So lower left quadrant, we put an O. That's where we actually deal with discovering what operation it is that we're going to be using. And then the lower right quadrant, we put an S for strategy. And that is where they actually work the problem. And I encourage students can use one strategy to work it. What I do to differentiate is if I have students who can easily work the problem, then I challenge them, how many other strategies, what other strategies could you use? Could you draw a picture? If you multiplied, could you do repeated addition? So for strategy, this area, depending on what level my students are, it may have one strategy, they may have several strategies. And what I found is as we've gone through, they like, the higher students like to see how many strategies they can come up with on there. All right, so we had our word problem, and our word problem was, Tim and Bob went to the comic book store on Saturday. Tim bought 6 comic books and Bob bought 12 comic books. How many total comic books did the boys buy? So for the initial read, I read it out loud. And again, this supports those students who would have difficulty reading this. For the second read, I have students silently reread the problem. And what I have them do, and what I'm going to ask you to do right now on your handout, is circle key numbers and any key or important or problem or even unknown words. So just like our close reading in language arts. So you want to go through your story problem and you want to circle your key numbers, any key words that you see, or again, I tell my students any unknown words, any words that they don't understand. We ran across the word purchase the other day in a story problem, and a couple of my kids circled it because they weren't sure what that meant. And when those come up, then it gives you a chance to work on those. For the third read, I do different strategies. Sometimes I have the students read it, sometimes we read it chorally, sometimes I read it. But for the third read, what you're going to do is you're going to identify the question being asked and underline the entire question that's being asked. So Tim and Bob went to the comic book store on Saturday. Tim bought 6 comic books and Bob bought 12 comic books. How many total comic books did the boys buy? And what you're going to do now is where it says question here, you're going to write, and I would usually call on students, I would ask for volunteers or call on students to read what is the problem that you underline. So over here we're going to write how many comic books
Total.
Thank you. Did the boys buy? Good time to reinforce it's a question, so you have to have a question mark at the end of it. And then the other thing that we do is we discuss, when we get our answer is going to be a number, what?
Greater than
Our number and what our unit is.
comic books.
So, right, so how many, so our answer is going to be blank comic books. I found that doing that helps the students because if they're focused on what it is they're supposed to be finding, then they don't get distracted by other things that are in there. They don't get distracted. It's not how many boys, it's not how many days did they read them or whatever. So it's blank comic books, and this is where ultimately our answer is going to go. So we have identified our question, and again, they have it marked, and it's whatever they have the problem in. For you guys, I made a handout, but it would be whatever their worksheet is, whatever it is. So in the QU square, that's quantity in units. So I have them draw a T-chart with quantity over here, Q, and when we did it the first few times, we spelled out quantity, and then units are over here. So, what quantities do you see in that story problem? And that would be right, that would be the numbers that you circled. So 6 and 6 what, Gary?
That would be 6 and 12 comic books.
Okay, and so your unit for 6 is
Comic
books, okay? And again, in this problem, it's the same, it's 12 comic books. Now I know in one of our other sessions, she discussed looking at numbers that weren't necessary, like in this problem she would have had them identify that there were 2 boys. I don't go there, I don't like to do that because I don't have my kids do that on a regular basis. Unless it's a problem where they have a number that's not needed, we don't discuss it. I don't discuss it. I just have them identify what numbers they need to use, okay? So we have our quantities, we have our units. The next thing we look at is our operation. So what I have them do is silently I have them read the problem one more time, and the question that I ask is, are we putting together or are we taking apart? That's my question that I leave with them there. So in this one, Terry, we are putting together. Right. So we write put together up here. The reason I do that is because if they identify whether they're putting together or taking apart, that helps them right away. If we're putting together, we could use addition or multiplication. If we're taking apart, we could use subtraction or division. It gets rid of two of those operations that they don't have to worry about. So in this particular problem, we would discuss and we would come up with the idea that we have two different numbers here. We need to find out how many total. So we are going to add. That's our operation. You can write add or addition. That's our operation. With my students, I would discuss that why would we not multiply, and we would actually come up with reasons that this would not, multiplication would not work with this. My students like that part of it, and that seems to be one of the most helpful parts, is the fact that it hones them in on that operation. Because otherwise what they do is they take two numbers and add them. If they don't know what else to do, at least my class, they just, oh, two numbers, look. So we've discovered that we know we're looking for how many comic books. We know the quantities and the units we have. We're putting together, we're adding. And then I would ask them to show me your strategy. So kids might write things like this. I have some that might draw pictures, especially when we multiply. A lot of times they would do multiplication sentence and arrays. I actually have some kids, because we do number talks, that like to show me how they do these. Like I actually have some kids that will then do this. They'll break these apart and they'll do all kinds of things. And again, my lower kids will come up with this and we're like, yay, and we're happy. If my quicker kids get done fast, then I challenge them. Show me another strategy, or show me, can you, like number talks, can you show me a way, that different ways that you can add those? So that's basically it. Usually before they report out, then I have them talk to like an elbow partner. They look at each other's papers, they discuss, then we come back together and we would all decide what did they buy. They bought 18, and so our answer goes up there. They bought 18 comic books. It's once they learn to do it, at first it's laborious, and I don't use this for every single word problem. I actually now we only use it for the more complex problems. Although some of my lower students do like to use it on all of them. They just make a little foursquare, they start going to town. And some of them have like their own little shorthand that they use, that they've taken on. But they have made it their own, so they can do it on their own. See, Gary's doing all kinds of strategies down there. But it works, and it just seems to make it. I asked my kids when we got done doing this the first few times, I said, did you like doing this? And they unanimously said yes. And I asked them why, and they said this was actually one of their favorite parts, was this right here. So what I'm going to have you do really quickly, and we'll probably go through and edit so we can include part of this, is what I would like you to do is if you'd flip your paper over, and with your elbow partner, pick either word problem 2 or word problem 3, and go ahead and use this strategy. I'm going to go ahead and leave mine up there on the screen for you, but go ahead and use that strategy and work through this with your elbow partner. Like I say, either pick word problem 2 or word problem 3, and just see what you come up with. All right, so you guys had a chance to work with your elbow partner. We talked about some of the questions, some of the ideas that you guys had, and again, make it your own. I've changed it as I've used it, and I've changed it as the kids have come up with suggestions for me. So, using close reading in math, it's one of the things that we might cover this year as a year-long process. We've done close reading and reading.